be okay. All right. So this time we're going to add some timing. I'm going to draw a couple versions of this. So I'm going to make a new layer. So I'm going to have a timing guide and my arc guide. And so I'll make these two layers and I will turn them into guides. So I can turn them on and off if I want to. So with my arc, I'm going to choose a color. I'll do like a blue color. And I'll just do this again. So kind of the same thing. I'm just kind of planning out the animation. Something like that. But then I'm going to do a little bit more with it in a second. Okay, so that's a pretty good arc. And then so when I'm doing my timing, so I'm going to switch to my timing layer. I'm going to lock my arc layer for a second. So when I'm doing my timing, there's a couple ways I could do it. I'm going to choose another color for a second. Let's do like, let's see, green. So a lot of time you'll see like if we call this our timeline, and let's say we're working with 48 frames, we'll think like this, we could map basically like our arc this way. And then we could essentially come up with our main frame. So this is like, we would circle our keyframes like that. And then we kind of draw frames at the various points, like the top of the arc and here. And then we would do some timing. So leading into or out of this one, we do like maybe frames that are closer together like that. So the closer the frames are together, the more time they'll take up. Whereas if I start to have frames that are farther apart like that, then that'll appear to be going faster because we're covering more ground over less time. So then when I hit here, I'll bounce up really quickly, and then going into here, I might have a couple frames like that, and then some frames like this, and then same thing here, like we slow down as we're going into this arc. And if we want to add anticipation to that, we could actually do like a long pause at a certain point, like maybe here we like stretch. We get rid of this one and we stretch it out even further to there. We can add some anticipation. And then here we'd probably have one in there and one in there. And so then I can go through each one of those frames and put them together. So that's how you do it but the thing with our motion is that it's very visual. So if you're doing, like we saw some of the examples where there's like a character turning or like preparing for a punch or things like that, those aren't going to have like the same exact visual thing, so you'll have to draw your timing out just as a line like this. But with our arc, we can actually really see the time in the arc very easily. So if we have a shape like that, I'm going to lock this layer and turn it off for a second. I'm going to do timing 2. And now I'm just going to draw the timing directly on the arc. So I have my keyframes. And usually I'll circle my keyframes. And then we can just draw our frames directly onto the arc. So when we're falling down, we're going to be going kind of slowly until gravity pulls us, and then we'll get this speeding up. So again, when my frames are closer together, we have more time, and as the frames get farther apart, we go faster. And so then maybe I'll add a frame in here, and then as we're getting to the top of the arc, we'll slow down a little bit, and then stretch out a bit here, maybe one frame there. And I can go back and add more frames later. But as we're kind of slowing down, actually we want to keep the same number of frames. And so now these frames are getting closer together as our ball is kind of slowing down. And then if we want to keep that, we're going to have like 3 frames in there, and 3 frames right there, and a couple frames right there. So we can actually draw our timing directly onto our arc in this situation. but sometimes we can't because we don't have that sort of nice, visual cue as to what our animation is going to look like. You can also just write your frame numbers, like you just write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you want to just like go through and write the frames, I don't usually do that, but it could be helpful to kind of map it out. Okay, so now we've got our guide. I'm going to turn timing into a guide. And so let's add another layer and do our final ball animation. So I'll call this ball 2. And I'm going to get my brush again. I'm going to make the stroke bigger. I'll do like 12 again. And then let's do our red ball color. So I'll start here. And so now I'm just going to go frame by frame because I've already kind of mapped out my frames. But you could do, let's see, how many frames did I actually write? I wrote 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. So I did almost 48 frames, so I'm just going to go by ones. But you could go by twos if you want. If you want to go by twos, you just skip ahead before you add your next frame. If you're going by ones, you just go to the next frame and hit F7. We're going to turn the onion skin on, of course, so we can see our animation. This has a key command Alt-Shift-O, so we can turn it on. And so then I can just start to draw my next frame, and then I'll hit F7, draw my next frame, and then keep going. And I want to keep squash and stretch in mind. So here I'll stretch out just a little bit. This I'm starting to stretch more. Remember that we don't want the ball to actually get bigger. So if we're stretching out, we need to also compress it a little bit. Okay, so now we have a lot of stretch. And then we have our squash here. And this is going to look very exaggerated. We can come back and add frames in later. Okay, so then we have another stretch. And then we're starting to unstretch a little here. And so I'm focusing on timing right now, but we can always come back and stretch out more or fix these frames. So we're going to stretch out here. Going to squash again right there. And here, as we get closer, I want to be careful not to make my ball smaller. The tendency to do that. So the ball needs to stay roughly the same size, even though our frames are getting closer together. Of course, I'm going slightly faster than I normally would to keep the demo a reasonable length. Okay, so then we're going to have a little bit of a squash here. There's not quite as much force at this point. Now my keyframes are really close together, so I think I'm actually going to zoom in a bit so that I can see them more clearly. And I have to make sure, again, I don't want my ball to get really small just because my keyframes are close together. So I'm just hitting F7 to add each one of these. And then I may go in and add some more keyframes after for a more dramatic effect. Okay. All right, so I'm going to hit Control 2 to zoom in again, and then I'm going to hit enter to preview the animation. So see how much better that looks with the timing than our previous version? Even though with our previous version, we did a nice pose to pose, we used a little squash and stretch. When we add this timing, it looks a lot more natural. Okay, so this is actually looking pretty good, but if I wanted to start to emphasize certain parts, I could go in and add some keyframes. So a couple things that I might want to try, if I want to do like some dramatic anticipation, I could go to up here where the ball is starting to fall, and I could just add in some extra frames. So if I want to add in an extra frame, I can hit F5. It should only add to the frame that's selected, but maybe I need to click on it. There you go. I can add F5 and F5, F5. So I can add some extra frames here. And so that adds this sort of anticipation where it's kind of moving slowly and then it goes in. And then if I want to match the look, I can get the timing right, and then I can go back here and I can just draw some quick in-betweens. So if I add, if I click on this guy and hit F7, I'll get a new keyframe, and I can just add an in-between here. I can move up a little bit, F7, add a keyframe here. It's a little tricky. I just have to make sure with my onion skin, the green is the next one and blue is the previous one, although it's kind of purple because I have a red ball. So I just want to add in between these two. And then I'll do one more. So I'll hit F7 here. And where's my... I need to move the onion skin a little bit so I just see exactly what I'm working with. There we go. So you don't have to do every single frame, but if you like the way that looks, you can add those in. And then if we want to emphasize the bounce, we can go here and add a couple frames in here. So I'll click here and I'll hit F5 and go back and hit F5 here. And then I'll hit F7, F7 to add new keyframes. And so then I can add a bit more to the squash. I actually think this is going to look bad, so I'm probably going to undo it, but just as an example. So I'll start my squash here. I want to sort of like angle the squash a little bit. And then angle the squash that way. That looks kind of weird. Let's just squash it that way. Okay, I actually think that's going to look kind of bad, but let's turn the onion skin off for a second and take a look at that. So it kind of just sticks on the ground a little bit. I think one frame might look nice, but 2 frames is probably excessive. So I'll just go back in here and take out this frame. So I can just hit Shift F5 and remove that frame. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so we've got a nice little anticipation, and then we've got some decent timing. We've got our squash and stretch, and we can see that as we start to add them all together, we get a nicer looking animation. Let's preview that real quick. Oh, we've got both of our balls because the other ball is just hidden, it's not a guide. But we can kind of see the difference between the two animations there. Let me just stretch out these guides. Or the ground is actually what I really need to stretch out. And then I'll just stretch out my last ball here. Just so it doesn't look weird when I export it. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so I'm gonna stop the recording here. The rest of the stuff that I'm gonna cover is review, but I am just gonna review how to export the file and then upload it to YouTube and then post it on OpenLab. Since we've only done that once so far, I'm just gonna review that today, but it is in the previous video from week 2. So I'm gonna stop this recording here.